I was lying in bed with a girl in a budget hotel somewhere near Bangkok airport. I'd met her in the last place that I was visiting, and she kindly offered to drive me the 2 hours to the airport and drop me off there early in the morning. And we're lying there, and she had her head on my chest. We're kind of like dozing off, going to sleep. And she was like poking around like my stomach. And she kind of like giggles, and then she's like,
Oh, your stomach is so soft.
and I was like, what the hell? Like, what do you mean soft? Like, is it just the broken English? Does she know what she was saying? Like, I've never been called that in my life. And I kind of brushed it off, and I was like, there's obviously a mistranslation there. And it wasn't until I got home and stepped on the scales and took this picture that I realized what she actually meant. And in fact, she was right. I had actually become soft, like for the first time. I didn't have any visible abs, and I was over 20% body fat for the first time. And that time traveling, although it was great fun, it's kind of taken its toll with all the drinking, late nights, junk food, just living a generally unhealthy lifestyle. So when I got home back to reality, I really tried to dial in and figure out what I can do to really clean things up. And after doing a lot of research, I managed to start a program where I lost 18 pounds in just 10 weeks. I cut 7 to 8% body fat, and I had the visible abs that I wanted. And the soft stomach was a thing of the past. So here are three things that massively helped me out to achieve this transformation so quickly. Imagine trying to sculpt a statue without first chiseling away all the excess rock. Don't start by adding all the little details. You start by first removing what doesn't belong. And what does this have to do with deleting your belly fat? Well, I'll give you an example. For me, between 2022 and 2023, I cut my alcohol intake by probably about 98 or 99%. And just this one change like made a huge difference. And if I had tried to make this big change whilst carrying on drinking and going out like quite frequently, then it would have just never have happened, even with lots of willpower and discipline to try and make it work. So my first tip is to basically remove before you start adding. And for me, the huge needle mover was the alcohol, because it wasn't just the getting drunk, it was the junk food after, it was the hungover days with very little willpower and never going to the gym the next day and just feeling like really groggy. So just by removing that one thing, it kind of knocked on, and it was like a domino effect to lead to removing a lot of other bad habits. Another analogy I like to use is as if you were buying like a fixer-upper house. It's a bit derelict, it's a bit of a mess inside, but you want to basically tidy it up, improve it, and then you've got a nice house at the end. Well, imagine if when you bought the house and there's all the junk inside it, if you just straight away started to, put the new kitchen in and a new bathroom and trying to make it look nice without first getting rid of all the waste that's inside. And that's kind of what it's like. So focus on cutting things out and then start to add. Whenever I used to think of meal plans, I always thought about, like a 7 day a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every meal is kind of different. And that was like the standard advice for people who are trying to diet down. And what I discovered through kind of just self experimenting is that just did not work for me at all. And I only started to make progress once I did something quite radical. And that's something I call the 1 day meal plan. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You basically create a meal plan for 1 day instead of seven. And then you just eat the same things every day. And you'll be surprised how much of an impact that can make and how much easier it makes things. And this is my number one piece of diet advice. And almost everyone that I've seen online who is in good shape follows the same thing. They just get themselves into a routine and basically just try not to deviate from that plan. Like, it's okay to have a cheat meal, like once every few weeks, but for the most part, if you're eating 14 or 21 times a week, the more consistent that is, the far more likely you are to stick to it. And it also enables you to meal prep, which is a huge time saver. And this completely eliminates the need for snacking, because if you can create one day's worth of perfect meals that keeps you satiated, that's easy to make, convenient, and you enjoy the taste of, then you won't get those cravings for usually like sugary or ultra processed snacks, which is usually something that gets in the way so much. And they say that variety is the spice of life, and it may be, but it really is the killer of progress. So I've got a clip here from my Fight Club Physique program of the Make Your Own Meal Plan module, where I take you through how to actually create this one-day meal plan. Ideally, I'd want at least 80% of my protein intake coming from these 2 or 3 sources, but why not 100%? Because other foods do have some protein in them, even like bread and spaghetti, like they still do have some protein. And that would make up the other 20%. So my starting weight was around 172 pounds, which was 78 kilos. And I know that I need around 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight, which means I'll multiply 172 by 0.8, and that gives me 138 grams of protein per day. And if I want 80% of my protein coming from these 2 or 3 sources, then I would multiply 138 grams by 80%, and that would give me 110 grams that I need. So time to get scanning. In November, I had surgery to reconstruct my anterior cruciate ligament in my knee. And after the surgery, I was pretty much bedbound for like 2 to 3 weeks. And I was on crutches for a while after that as well. And yet, even though I wasn't moving at all, I ended up losing 4 kilos just because I was not eating crap. And this is the final point, which is exercise is not as important as you think. And fat loss really is 80, even 90% diet. So that's where it's best to focus most of your attention. So the only exercise that I did when I was leaning down is I went to the gym 3 times a week for around 45 minutes to an hour each time. And I made sure to do 10K steps per day, and just to keep moving. And I didn't need to do any of the HIIT training, any high rocks, any like high intensity classes. It was just walking and gym, and that was it. And it didn't take up too much time. All this to say is that I think it's best to first focus on removal and then slowly add and progressively overload. So now hopefully you've got some extra tips on how to lose a few pounds around the belly. You might actually be interested in this video, which is finding out the physique that 72.5% of women find most attractive from a study which I found online. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.